হ্যালো এভরিওয়ান, আজকে আমার আলোচনার টপিক ব্রেনস্টেম। It is a stalk-like in shape and connects the narrow spinal cord with the expanded forebrain. The brainstem is composed of three parts from above downwards: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. It has three main functions. It contains the cranial nerve nuclei, 3rd to 12th cranial nerve. It serves as a passage for the ascending and descending tracts connecting the spinal cord with different parts of the forebrain. And it contains important reflex centers associated with the control of respiration, the cardiovascular system, and with the control of consciousness. Now, midbrain. It measures about 2 cm in length and connects the pons and cerebellum with the forebrain. The cerebral aqueduct is the cavity of the midbrain. If a transverse line is drawn through the cerebral aqueduct, it divides the midbrain into two parts. Ventral part consists of a pair of cerebral peduncle, and the dorsal part, the tectum. This is cerebral peduncle. This is tectum. Cerebral peduncle has three parts: tegmentum, substantia nigra, and crus cerebri. And the tectum consists of two pairs of rounded elevations termed as superior and inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi are centers for visual reflex, and the inferior colliculi are lower auditory centers. The superior brachium connects the superior colliculus to the lateral geniculate body and the optic tract. The inferior brachium connects the inferior colliculus to the medial geniculate body. Transverse section of the midbrain at the level of the inferior colliculus. We can see this is cerebral aqueduct. Central gray matter around the cerebral aqueduct contain two nucleus. This is trochlear nerve nucleus and this is mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. At the center of the tegmentum there is decussation of superior cerebellar peduncle, and there are four lemnisci dorsomedial to substantia nigra. Medial lemniscus, this is trigeminal lemniscus, this is spinal lemniscus, and the lateral lemniscus. This part is called reticular formation. This is medial longitudinal fasciculus. This is tectospinal tract and this is rubrospinal tract. Medial on 6 of the crus cerebri contain frontopontine fibers. Middle to third of the crus cerebri contain pyramidal tracts, and the lateral 1/6 of the crus cerebri contain temporopontine, parietopontine, and occipitopontine fibers. Transverse sections of the midbrain at the level of superior colliculus. This is nucleus of superior colliculus. There are medial, trigeminal, and a spinal lemniscus, and there is no lateral lemniscus. The central gray matter contains two nucleus: oculomotor nucleus and mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. This is medial longitudinal fasciculus. This is dorsal tegmental decussation, and this is ventral tegmental decussation. This is red nucleus. This is reticular formation. Now pons. The pons connects the midbrain to the medulla oblongata. It is about 2.5 cm long. It lies in the posterior cranial fossa on the clivus, anterior to the cerebellum. Transverse fibers of the pons converge on its side to form medial cerebellar peduncle, by which it is attached with cerebellum. External features of the pons. The pons has two surfaces, ventral or anterior and dorsal or posterior, two borders, superior and inferior border. Now the ventral surface. Ventral surface is convex from side to side. In the median plane, it presents a vertical groove, the basilar groove, which lodges the basilar artery. This is basilar groove. The trigeminal nerve is attached to ventral surface by two roots, a small motor root and a large sensory root. The junction between midbrain and pons is marked by cerebral peduncles. Through the pontomedullary junction, abducent, facial, and vestibulocochlear nerve emerge from medial to lateral side. Now the dorsal surface. Posterior surface forms the upper half of the floor of fourth ventricle and is triangular in shape. The posterior surface is divided into symmetrical halves by a median sulcus. Lateral to this sulcus is an elongated elevation, the medial eminence, which is bounded laterally by the sulcus limitans. The inferior end of the medial eminence is slightly expanded to form the facial colliculus, which is produced by the root of the facial nerve winding around the nucleus of the abducens nerve. Now the internal structure of the pons. A cross section at any level of pons shows two parts, a large ventral or basilar part and a small dorsal or tegmental part, divided by the transverse fibers of the trapezoid body. Ventral part is continuous inferiorly with the pyramids of the medulla and on its side with the middle cerebellar peduncle. The dorsal part is direct upwards continuation of the medulla excluding the pyramid. The internal structure of the pons may be studied at two levels: transverse section through the caudal part passing through the facial colliculus and transverse section through the cranial part passing through the trigeminal nucleus. Transverse section through the caudal part of the pons at the level of the facial colliculus. This is the cavity of fourth ventricle. This is superior medullary velum. This is nucleus of abducens nerve. This is the motor nucleus of facial nerve. This is vestibular nuclei. This is the spinal tract and nucleus of trigeminal nerve. And this is the facial colliculus. This is reticular formation. This is pontine nucleus. White matter at this level consists of trapezoid body, medial longitudinal fasciculus, medial lemniscus, transverse pontine fibers, and the bundle of corticospinal and corticonuclear fibers. This is superior cerebellar peduncle. This is inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now the transverse section through the pons at the level of trigeminal nuclei. This is superior cerebellar peduncle. The gray matter at this level consists of motor and sensory nuclei of trigeminal nerve. This is motor nuclei of trigeminal nerve and this is sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve. And the white matter at this level consists of trapezoid body, medial longitudinal fasciculus, transverse pontine fibers, medial lemniscus, and the spinal lemniscus. Now the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata connects the pons superiorly with the spinal cord inferiorly. The junction of the medulla and spinal cord is at the origin of the anterior and posterior root of the first cervical spinal nerve, which corresponds approximately to the level of the foramen magnum. The medulla oblongata is conical in shape. Here you can see the central canal continues upwards into lower half of the medulla. In the upper half, it expands as cavity of fourth ventricle. The medulla is divided into two equal halves by the anterior median fissure and posterior median sulcus. Features on the anterior surface. On each side of the anterior median fissure, there is a swelling called the pyramid. The pyramids are composed of corticospinal and corticobulbar fibers. The pyramids taper inferiorly, and here the majority of the descending fibers cross over to the opposite side, forming the decussation of the pyramids. Posterolateral to the pyramids are the olives, which are oval elevations produced by the underlying inferior olival nuclei. The rootlets of the hypoglossal nerve emerge from the groove between pyramid and the olives. Posterior to the olives are the inferior cerebellar peduncle, which connects the medulla with the cerebellum. The roots of the glossopharyngeal vagus and the cranial roots of the accessory nerve emerge through the groove between olives and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Features on the posterior surface. The upper half of the posterior surface of the medulla forms the lower part of the floor of the fourth ventricle, and the lower half of the posterior surface of the medulla is continuous with the posterior surface of the spinal cord and is divided by the posterior median sulcus. On each side of the median sulcus, there is an elongated swelling, the gracial tubercle, produced by the underlying gracial nucleus. Lateral to the gracial tubercle, there is another swelling, the cunate tubercle, produced by the underlying cunate nucleus. Now the internal structure. In the medulla, the white matter surrounds the central mass of gray matter. The internal structure of the medulla is studied at four levels. Level of decussation of pyramid. Number 2, level of decussation of lemnisci. Number 3, level of olives. And number 4, level just inferior to the pons. Transverse section of the medulla oblongata at the level of decussation of the pyramids. The gray matter at this level consists of nucleus gracilis. This is nucleus cuneatus. This is spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. This is medial accessory olivary nucleus. And the white matter at this level composed of motor and sensory tracts. This is lateral corticospinal tract. This is pyramid. This is spinal tract of trigeminal nerve. This is anterior spinocerebellar tract. This is posterior spinocerebellar tract. And this is lateral spinothalamic tract. Transverse section of the medulla oblongata at the level of the decussation of the medial lemnisci. The gray matter at this level consists of nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, inferior olivary nucleus, and the hypoglossal nucleus. And the white matter at this level consists of motor and sensory tract. This is pyramid, and this is decussation of medial lemnisci. This is fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, anterior spinocerebellar tract, posterior spinocerebellar tract, lateral spinothalamic tract. Now the artery supply of brainstem. The midbrain is supplied by the basilar artery through its posterior cerebellar artery and superior cerebellar artery. The pons is supplied by the basilar artery through pontine branches, superior cerebellar artery and the anterior inferior cerebellar artery. The medulla oblongata is supplied by basilar artery through anterior inferior cerebellar artery, vertebral artery through medullary branch, posterior inferior cerebellar artery, anterior spinal artery and posterior spinal artery. Now the reticular formation. The reticular formation is a continuous network of nerve cells and nerve fibers which extend from the spinal cord to the cerebrum through the medulla, pons, midbrain, subthalamus, hypothalamus, and thalamus. The diffuse network is divided into three longitudinal columns. Median column, which contain intermediate sized neuron, medial column, which contain large neuron, and lateral column, which contain small neuron. Here you can see in the figure the reticular formation. Functions of reticular formation: control of skeletal muscle activity, control of somatic and visceral sensations, control of autonomic nervous system, control of the endocrine nervous system, influence on the biological clocks, and concern with consciousness and wakefulness.